Talk to me about the difference between wanting and needing success.
The difference comes down to ego and how much of your self-worth is wrapped up in success and achievement. So I've done a lot of work on this over the last few years with a number of sports psychologists because I wanted to stand on the start line at the Paris Olympics, really wanting success and wanting a medal and being intentional and willing and gritty and tough because they're part of who I am. They're some of my key values. But I wanted to balance that want with a deep knowing that my value is greater than sport and greater than achievement. And even if for factors beyond my control, that medal didn't come to me, I would be okay. And I would still know who I am, my value, and that the people around me would still love me and they'd still be there, which is pretty mind-blowing for athletes to come to terms with.
You use the words gritty and tough. How easy is that for a woman to bring forward as values? It's not common that you hear of gritty and tough as two values in a woman. So where did they come from for you? And yeah, what do they mean for you?
I agree. And I think historically, maybe 10 years ago when I was growing up as a young girl in sport, I didn't have visible women athlete role models who demonstrated traits like that because our culture told us it wasn't acceptable. But we're part of such an exciting generation for women's sport. And just last year, seeing the Australian women's football team, the Matildas, playing at the Football World Cup, and the media really celebrating and showcasing just how gritty and tough and fierce and athletic and muscular and amazing they were. They are now the role model for Australian women and girls, and that's part of where it comes from.
It was interesting. We had Lola Anderson, who was at the Paris Games. She was in the quad sculls for Great Britain. Won gold medal. It was an amazing race, and we spoke about this whole being a woman and sort of being accepting that even as a rower, you build muscle, you get broader, and that actually moves away from this sort of idea of feminine. And the Paris Games was amazing because it was the first 50-50 split in men and women. But there was also a really great video or image of all the different body types that were on show for women in the games. And men, it's not even considered. It's not sort of a thing that gets put forward. But there would be a drastic difference in the shapes of men. But the shapes of women, it was just really brought forward to say, like, no, this is all women in vast different elite aspects, and they're all different sizes. And I thought it was just a really great image to be able to see and showcase that difference.
I agree. I love to show schoolgirls those different images in terms of fostering healthy body image, because the Olympics is the pinnacle of sport. If anyone should look like an athlete, we can look to the Olympics to see what that looks like. But girls have been fed this very, very narrow idea of what a female athlete looks like. And paradoxically, that image is of the Victoria's Secret model, which probably is not able to run very fast or tackle in rugby. So just seeing the body diversity on display at the Olympics, and it shows young girls that all body types fit somewhere, and a lot of it comes down to genetics and your anatomy or physiology. So maybe you fit well as a marathon runner, and maybe you fit well as a rugby player, and we can all, regardless of how we look, find our place not only in sport but more broadly.
Yeah, I think this willingness to want to fit into one type of look for young women seems to be the go-to thing at the moment. It seems to be. I go to schools, give talks. I know you do the same. I don't know if there are similarities here, but over here in the UK, you walk through the halls and kind of everyone is trying to be like the other person, and everyone is trying to look like them, whether it's have the same makeup, the same hairstyle, the same look, and it's trying to blend in. Yet again, paradoxically, there is this want to be someone unique, to be someone that stands out. And we've all got main character syndrome, right? We all are the main character in our own story, but it's almost by the mechanism at which it's being that we use it, or some use it, they actually move away from that idea of being unique and standing out, and they don't draw into that part of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always going to have that copycat behavior and shift towards whatever is being celebrated. So, if society and if our culture was able to praise and celebrate all bodies, or more diverse bodies than we currently do, then I think there would be less of that pressure to mold ourselves into the one cookie cutter image of what a woman or a girl should look like. So, we need much greater diversity within the media of what young girls are seeing as acceptable, much greater diversity in what we compliment and celebrate as an amazing young person. And I think overall, we just need less emphasis on how we look. I really encourage young girls to shift from form to function, shift from an obsession over how your body looks to gratitude and acceptance and a celebration of what it does for you, how it allows you to run for the bus when it's flying by and play the sports that you love with your friends, and age well. That's the stuff that matters.
So form to function is you talking about the form is how it looks. Function, actually, it's doing something for you. It's actually doing its job, and it can do it well. It can perform or just exist, essentially.
Exactly. And, just like every other girl in sport, I had challenges with body image, and I think female athletes are extra vulnerable to that because a lot of the time sport uniforms are designed historically to objectify women's bodies, and you're all out on display, and it's being normalized once again for our culture to really comment and scrutinize and pull apart women athletes' bodies. But working on that over the years, that shift from form to function has been really helpful. And I think we can't ask girls to aim for loving every inch of their body. I don't think that's realistic. But this shift towards acceptance, neutrality, gratitude, and focusing on what it does is much more helpful.
I wonder if it's a little bit easier. I totally agree, but I wonder if it's a little bit easier for us to say that as athletes because we have we have this function standing in front of us, right? Like you know why you're using it. For the average girl that's going to high school, there may not be this clear function as to why they're using it, and even a goal may be attached to it.
I agree. That's a great point. I mean, they could simplify that function to just, I'm grateful that my body lives and breathes and functions well, and my brain does great thinking when I'm writing my school exams. When I did this thought exercise with all the women in my family, my mum who's in her 50s, my grandma who's in her 80s, the gratitude they had for their body was really different again. My mum was all about gratitude that it was able to give birth to 3 babies. My sister was talking about gratitude for her body being able to give people really warm hugs that they always love. And then my 82-year-old grandma was more focused on sport. She was saying, I'm grateful that my body allows me to play tennis 3 times a week still and go on long walks with my girlfriends. So it's different for everyone. I don't think it necessarily has to be about physical activity outcomes.
This is something that I've been thinking about recently, and I kind of named it this counterfactual gratitude. And it was I was someone who struggled with finding gratitude in my life. Now, even from a physical sense, I have this condition called Poland syndrome. So I'm missing my right pectoral muscle, 2 ribs, and like as an athlete, it was a bit of a challenge. And so I always found myself as a young lad constantly looking to everyone else and going, I wish I had that as well, or I didn't have this, and I wish I could be, in inverted commas, normal, right? And this wave came over me recently, and it was through a meditation, and it was based around being grateful for what I don't have to worry about, right? So right now I don't have to worry that I'm not in a war zone, right? I don't have to worry about sort of where my next meal's coming from, but I also don't have to worry that I can stand up and walk away. I can go to the gym and experience these things, like, and I'm not having to worry that those things don't exist in my life. And there's always that, I think it's that quote of, a healthy man wants 999 things, and an unhealthy man wants one thing, right? And I just always get reminded by that. And it's sort of when you get struck by this, oh, I wish I had that, is to not necessarily look for that thing that you wish you had, but actually just kind of look at the thing that you are glad you don't have. So it's this kind of counterfactual gratitude that you have, where you are searching for things. Oh, I'm actually kind of glad I don't have that. It's not a dominance thing. So I'm not saying, oh, I'm glad I'm not that person. It just doesn't, you don't have to compare it to another person, but it's just more, I'm just glad I'm okay in this situation, and I can be grateful for that.
Yeah, I think putting things into perspective like that can be really helpful, because often when something's happening to us, we really catastrophize and feel sorry for ourselves and focus on all of the things we're missing. I have a little injury at the moment, for example. It's nothing major, but it seemed all encompassing, even though it's like a 1 out of 10 pain. And I was speaking to a teammate at the gym the other day, and I was saying, oh, I'm a bit injured. And she said, oh, yeah, me too. But my Achilles is a 7 out of 10. And even just putting it into perspective in that way, I suddenly felt, oh, okay, maybe I should actually be grateful that mine's a 1 out of 10 and not ending my career at the moment.
Yeah, there's always something that you can lean onto where you're like, there's definitely something worse out there right now. And again, it comes back to this other part of gratitude, where by definition, people listening to this podcast, maybe even viewing the podcast, that just by definition and default that you can do that, there are already over 1 billion people that would instantly want to trade places with you right now. Like, and if that doesn't just shock you into some form of gratitude, like, I don't really know what will. I want to lean back to the success, the needing and wanting success, because that, as an elite athlete, can't necessarily be an easy move to make, because I know so many elite athletes that are so defined by themselves as to the success that they have, the outcomes that they have. Did you start in a place where you found yourself needing that success, or defining yourself as success, and then did the work, and now you're in that place where you've just explained?
Absolutely. As a junior athlete trying to transition into the Australian national teams, there's this great pressure of needing to prove yourself. And it did feel like needing success, because I wanted to be in the top 3 to start making those teams, which is what you require in athletics. I wanted to prove myself to the head coach and to the world that I was worthy of standing on an Olympic start line, which was always my dream. And it has taken a decade in elite sport and working closely with about 3 different sports psychologists to work on this idea of wanting it but not needing it. And I've modeled it off my teammates. So a few of the other women athletes on the athletics team, Nina Kennedy in the pole vault, Olympic champion now. Nicola Olaslager's in the high jump, Olympic silver 2 times. They demonstrate this knowing of who they are and knowing of their identity, this ability to disentangle person from persona, or who they are from what they do. And I've just seen over the last number of years being on the team with them, they stand at the start of the run-up for pole vault or high jump looking very peaceful but fierce at the same time. And that combination is unbeatable. They just look like they know who they are. They've done the work. They know that there's a bigger picture beyond sporting achievements, but they're ready to really give it their all. It's not a complacency or a laziness.
Yeah, that is something that not many people have, because I think if you flip that, let's take Nina Kennedy, for example, standing at the start of your run-up for a pole vault. You take another athlete that might be really terrified. It's usually because they're focused on that outcome that they're about to have, pretty much saying something about them. If I don't hit this mark, if I don't hit that height, then I am a bad person. The athlete didn't fail in that moment. The human being failed completely. And I think that then instantly draws you into that fearfulness, that place of everything rides on this moment and everything rides on this outcome. In order for me to be someone, I have to do something.
Exactly. And I think a nice idea that comes off this is fear-based motivation and the alternative, which is values-based motivation. I was never aware of this concept until the eve of the Tokyo Olympics, where I had a lot of fear, and that was what was driving me. And once again, my sports psychologist sat me down and said there's an alternative, and that is to see what you do as a vehicle through which to explore your values. And I thought, what is this man talking about? But he basically explained that from a young age in sport and at school, in different areas, I came to understand that the only way to feel motivated was to avoid my greatest fears. So I would feel motivated to do well in a competition because I was terrified of my rival. I was terrified of letting my coach down. I was terrified of seeing a slow time next to my name. Any of these fears. And what he helped me realize was this fear-based motivation never really led to happiness or fulfillment. You just sort of feel relieved when you cross the finish line or you pass the test and those greatest fears haven't come true. A bit unsustainable. So tipping into values-based motivation obviously requires us to articulate what our values are. Some of mine within sport are the pursuit of mastery, being a good role model, leaving a bit of a legacy. And when I see sport as an opportunity to explore those values, the outcome ceases to matter because I'm exploring all of those and developing in the direction of my values, regardless of a medal or not.
Yeah, and that they're untouchable. Like they're untouchable from any outcome or any form of uncontrollable source out there. Like that, those are all totally in your control, which are so empowering. But also really, there's not enough effort drawn on those. We don't spend enough time thinking about what are my values that could motivate me into this. You spoke about being a role model. That was exactly one of my motivations as a young kid to make it in professional sport. I had this idea of like, if I can get myself to being a role model, then surely by default, the actions that I have taken to get there will have some form of positive outcome. Like, surely I'm going to have a positive influence on the world if I just do this idea of being a role model. And sure enough, it is, because I think it then guides you, right? I think your values are only there to make you make better decisions. Ultimately, you know that when you're met with a decision now, it's like, okay, do I go towards something that makes me a role model or away from it that makes me a role model? Okay, I know where I'm going now. And I think people get lost in those decisions sometimes because they're like, I don't actually know what I stand for.
Absolutely. And it is a decision. We often find ourselves at what we call a choice point, where you've got two clear paths to walk down. And generally, we can see it as being one is guided by fear and it's away from our values. And that's the very hooked mentality. We're hooked by our fears. And the other option from that choice point is being unhooked from fear and walking towards our values. And I find this not just in sport, but in life, time and time again. At that choice point, which direction am I going to go in? And by articulating our values, they can really guide us, as you say.
And you mentioned about them being motivation. And I heard the story about your grandmother having fled from Auschwitz, right? And that you sort of drew on that during the Olympics. I'm really curious to know as what lessons you've drawn from her and her story and brought into what you're doing now.
So we lost Nana just before the Tokyo Games, and that really catalyzed me getting to know her, which might sound funny, but as a Holocaust survivor, she never wanted to speak about it while she was alive. And it wasn't really until she passed that I really dove into the documents and the handwritten notes that she'd left us, the passports, the photographs. My auntie has kept it all. And because it happened so acutely before the Tokyo Games, it was a huge source of grit and motivation for me there, and it has continued to be 3 years later for the Paris Games, particularly because Paris was the place that she fled to directly from her final concentration camp in Ravensbrück after Auschwitz. So, I mean, it's an unimaginable, unfathomable story, and I don't like to sort of liken it to this day and age because it's completely different, but I wear her bracelet every day when I'm racing, and just how tangible it is and the feeling of it literally moving up and down my arm is a physical reminder of the fact that grit and determination and conquering the unimaginable are in my blood, in my DNA from her. And it's also a reminder to really take life and make the most of every opportunity, because she endured the unimaginable to give my dad a chance of a life, and then subsequently it's given me a chance of a life. And I think it's helping me be more intentional and more willing to give things my all, rather than sitting back and being passive and letting life go by. I just can't do that to her. So something that I was really thinking about in the Paris, just 2 days out from my race in Paris, was the difference between being passive and being intentional. And I wanted to be intentional for her to make the most of this opportunity. And there was a critical moment in the race. I was sitting in fifth with 5Ks to go. So we were about 3/4 of the way through the race. And suddenly I had all the mental and physical and cognitive signs of fatigue and of pain. And I was starting to negotiate the goals that I'd initially set out. And I was starting to be a little passive rather than intentional. And my sister, her voice cut through the 30,000 other people. And this sounds cheesy, but her voice was louder than the voice in my head that was telling me I couldn't get into the medals. And what she was yelling out was, "This is your race. This is your race," over and over. And it gives me goosebumps now. And the power in that line, firstly, starting with this, like, here you are, that was an immediate anchor to the present moment. And then she's saying, it's yours for the taking. Like, Nana made sacrifices and was incredibly tough and resilient. Your parents have tried to build a better life in Melbourne. Here you are. There is the Eiffel Tower. You've got 5Ks to go, 20 minutes, that's all. And it's your race for the taking. And as soon as I heard her say that, her voice was breaking because she'd been yelling for an hour. I had this final wind of energy. I did a 4:03 walking kilometer to overtake fourth and third and put myself in that bronze medal position. So that's just one example of how Nana's story of survival comes into play in my races and fuels me.
What do you think the passive option looks like there?
So I was reflecting on this 2 days before the race and looking around in the Australian Tower at the Olympic Games, and I noticed that Australians do have a cultural tendency to be a little passive, and it's something that I love about our culture. It makes us very friendly and laid back. We actually have a saying that a lot of us say all the time, and that's, "Oh, she'll be right." Whenever well, whenever there's an opportunity to pay attention to detail or worry about something, we're like, "No, we're not going to worry. She'll be right." And I think that is great most of the time, but it's incongruent with high performance. We need to be able to dip in and out of that laid back, kind, passive headspace and into a fierce, intentional headspace. Perhaps it would be crazy to always be intentional about everything, and we'd perhaps burn out and be horrible to be around. But on that day at the Olympics, it's time to be intentional.
I've had that experience in Australia in sport where, and cricket's interesting because Australia for a long time, powerhouse, still are a powerhouse in cricket, and they were relentless. Like they were a very intentional, very active team, in your face. You knew if you were going to Australia, you still know if you go to Australia, you're going to get it. And especially if you're English, you're going to get it. Like it's much more fierce. But I had noticed that was a passiveness that was starting to roll over. Now, I don't know whether that is a reflection of society sort of leaking into sport, and I know there's also you look at Sydney 2000. There's a interesting statistic that most games, when they have hosted their Olympics, they fall off after. So in Sydney, Australia dominated. In Athens, they had a night there. But the only team, funny enough, the only squad to do better is the UK, is Great Britain. We did better in Rio than we did in London. Um, but there was a book, and I think it was called The Talent Code, where they spoke about what Australia had done to lead into a 2000 Olympics, and what they brought in scientists. They were very active in what they were doing, and then it brought this massive spike in development in high performance, and Australia were leaders globally in sport and high performance. Then sort of after that, they'd shut the doors and they said, right, no more, we don't need anyone in because we've got everyone here. But that slowed the growth in areas. This book was just talking about how this had fallen away over time. And I wonder if that then, just whether there was this more shift into she'll be all right, rather than actually keeping on with that real active, we're going to continuously look to strive and improve and develop. I wonder whether that just died off a little bit.
Maybe. And I think the other thing that holds us back from being intentional is fear of failure and fear of embarrassment and fear of being vulnerable. Because ultimately, to be intentional, to set lofty goals and put your hand up and say, I want to win an Olympic medal or whatever your goal may be, is scary. I mean, in the months leading up to the Olympics, I was interviewed a lot by journalists, and they would always ask about outcomes, and they would always say, what shape are you in? Are you ready to bring Australia home a medal? And I was willing to take that risk and be vulnerable and say, yep, my goal is to stand on the podium. Gold would be amazing. I think I've done the work, because I knew I'd be okay if I didn't, as we talked about earlier with wants and needs. But I think a huge reason that people shy away and be passive is because of how scary it feels to put our hand up and say that we want things, especially as women and girls.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a shyness in young girls that I've spoken to, and especially I work with, when I ask them, tell me what your goal is. And I always say to them, it takes the same amount of energy to dream big as it does to dream small. So why don't we just dream big? And you ask them and they sort of feel shy to say, yeah, I do want to be a pro athlete. I do want to achieve this. And I'm like, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that. Just say it, big chested, get it out there, put it out there, and then we know that that's something you want to go for. There is no shame in saying, I have this big dream, I have this ambition. I feel the shame is keeping it inside and sort of always hoping and wishing it would have been there, and what if it could have been there. That is something to be really afraid of.
Well, I think ambition has been discouraged in young girls. Society encourages them to keep their dreams really small, subservient, keep their bodies really small, keep their ideas of what career path they might take in the future really small, which is serving nobody. I mean, it was serving the patriarchy, which isn't helpful. So to encourage them to have ambition, and for that word to not be a critique when someone says, oh, she's an ambitious woman, the connotation is that that's a bad thing, or that doesn't fit in with society's expectations. But young girls need to be able to dress up as an astronaut on what do you want to be when you grow up day at school, or a doctor, or whatever. We need to dismantle those fences that we put up for them.
You said in that post-race interview, which went nuts, you said within it that around 16 to 17 you'd questioned your place in the field on sports. Can you talk me through that period of life?
Absolutely. I had always been involved in sport from a young age. Both of my parents were sporty, and I have two younger sisters, so we were all involved. But time and time again, whether it was comments in the schoolyard related to my body being wrong and not fitting in, whether it was having too much ambition, whether it was questioning my place on the sporting field because I didn't have the competence yet, this overemphasis on technical skill from a young age. All of these things accumulated to a point where at 16, I really questioned that Olympic dream and whether I belonged in sport at all. I had a critical turning point on a family holiday shortly after. We were in Tokyo. The year was 2016. And I was at this critical moment of very low self-esteem, really wanting and thinking that I'd be giving up on my sporting goals. And my younger sister, who's 5 years younger, was probably a little naive to all of that confidence struggle that I'd been enduring. And she said, "How cool's Tokyo? Why don't you try and make the Australian Olympic team for the Tokyo Games in 4 years' time? That'll be great because that'll give us an excuse to come back here for another family holiday. More sushi, more stationery, more cute culture." And I just thought, "You're being ridiculous. I don't have what it takes. And also, why are you putting this on me? You're a fantastic gymnast and diver. Why don't you do it?" And Mum, who was sort of eavesdropping, said, "You know what? I need to tell you that I can see something in you that you perhaps don't. And I think you have what it takes." And she just approached it with this perfect balance of no pressure, but support. We will be there for you day in, day out, physically, emotionally, mentally, and we'll help you get there if this is something that you want. And I think as a teenage girl, feeling pretty lost, a bit unsure of what direction I'd go in after high school, sport was that familiar place that I'd grown up in. And the idea of earning this uniform and the opportunities it would bring. Mum helped me see that the opportunities to travel and to undergo self-development and to make lifelong friends, these were not afforded to everyone. And if I had this gift, if I had this opportunity, as I said with Nana's story, like I had to grab it with both hands. And 10 years later, here we are.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really like defining moment. Some athletes can't define that moment when it was for them. I actually had a similar moment. Funny enough, it was on a holiday, and is this moment where I was around my parents and I definitely said like, this is the thing I want to do and I want to go after it. But yeah, not many people do it. It tends to be a general transition and gradual. Oh, this is actually something I enjoy, and bang, I'm doing it.
Yeah, for me, it was that crossroads moment. And, a lot of the time we talk about support networks being important. And I always felt overwhelmed or unsure, thinking, well, I don't have 100 people in my support network who I could go to in a crisis like that. And in actual fact, I just needed two people who knew me well. I needed my younger sister to just say, "How about it? Go after the Olympic team." And I needed my mum, who knows me well, to say, "I can see that you have what it takes, even if you don't quite have the confidence yet." So, yeah, I want listeners to know that a support network can be one or two people, and listen to them when they steer you in the right direction.
I know your initiative, Play On, was built from the declining numbers of young girls participating in sports. Uh, why do you think that those numbers were on the decline for young girls in sports?
According to This Girl Can, which was actually initially in the UK and then Victoria, where I live, copied it. They brought it to Victoria. According to their research, the fear of judgment is the main barrier for women and girls. The statistics in Victoria are at the age of 16, participation is fairly healthy, and I think that's because of physical activity classes being compulsory at school up until that age. But by the time those girls are 65 years and older and they're women, 47%, so less than half, are engaging in any kind of physical activity. And that's not just organized sport, that's going for a walk, any gardening, any kind of physical activity. The way I think about it, there are three key areas of barriers. Those are either to do with the physical environment, culture, or health literacy. So in terms of the physical environment, we can think about the way sporting facilities are designed, and is that with the needs of women and girls in mind? Is there privacy for getting changed? Are there sanitary bins? Is there adequate lighting so that when training is early in the morning in winter or late at night and the sun's down, are we avoiding being active because of well-founded fears for personal safety? And we hear what happens to women when they go for a run. When we think about the built environment, we can also think about your sport uniforms and whether there are diverse options that make everyone feel welcome, and options for covering up more for religious reasons or for just wanting to be a little more covered and conservative. Are there options for tracksuits and looser uniforms for those who would feel more confident? And are there options for a little skirt and a top for those who would feel confident in that sort of uniform? When I think about culture as a barrier, I think about language, and I think about girls telling me that they quit because they were told that they throw like a girl, like that's such a bad thing, or in a mixed physical education class playing basketball and they find that the boys are never passing them the ball. And what does that reinforce? It reinforces that they're no good and that they're weak and that girls are not athletic. And why would he pass you the ball because you're not going to score a goal? And then confidence diminishes from there. And when I think about culture, I also think about who's visible in the media, which sporting teams are taking up all of the back pages of the newspaper, and who do we have as role models to look up to. And then that third bucket, in terms of health literacy, I think about nutrition and body image and menstrual cycles and where are girls getting their information? Is it from social media profiles where people are giving unhelpful information about what they eat in a day or how their body looks or how to navigate a period as a female athlete? Or can girls receive the most up-to-date and helpful information in their PE class, in a play-on session, from a doctor in a more helpful way to guide them? So they're the three broad barriers that we need to break down.
Yeah, I mean, totally see it, and I think the literacy one, just at the end there, the social media literacy is horrendous. There are very few people that I really guide myself towards in who I take advice from on, and I like to think of myself as pretty literate in this area, that I try to cross every T, dot every I. Now, look, am I an optimizer in everything? No, because I know that performance isn't built out of pure optimization. It's about maximization of what you have on the day and what we can do with ourselves. But I genuinely think the sort of TikTok, Instagram, sort of nutritional, what I eat in a day, it's just not reality. And I see these people that do put this stuff out, and I'm like, you're so far off the mark of what actually real athletes will do, the elites look like. And also, that psychologically, there's a drawback to, if you are to follow this perfect diet and have it this certain way, and there is a psychological drawback to that as well. You'll probably drive yourself insane having to count the amount of almonds that you're about to have in your oats in the morning.
Absolutely. And that was me. I was in that position. So I was relying on social media completely to get my nutrition information until I was 20 and finally had access to a sports dietitian through the Victorian Institute of Sport. But until then, it's tricky because it can be expensive to access a sports dietitian. And so young girls are getting most of their education, I would say, either from peers or from social media. And that can lead down a slippery slope to Red S, or relative energy deficiency in sport, which is a syndrome. It's a whole collection of symptoms that she may feel. And it applies to men and boys as well, of course. Things like endocrine dysfunction, things like mood instability, things like recurrent injury, recurrent infection, gastrointestinal issues, reduced performance as well. So when I noticed that I was clearly underfueling because of getting my nutrition education online. I was possibly overtraining, or perhaps the underfueling just led to that energy imbalance, and chronically can lead to red S. When you start to notice a number of those symptoms within the syndrome, that's where we can really be at risk of things like stress fractures, things like career-ending injuries, and burnout that, again, are a key reason that people are dropping out of sport.
I also think kind of nailing in on this, the nutrition side for sure, but also linked with the social media aspect. There is this for women, especially. And do you know what? Actually, no, I will categorize men in this because men have their form of body dysmorphia there's the bigorexia. I see a lot in the gym. There's like, how big can I get? And the at both ends of the spectrum, whether it's an eating disorder, but also just genuine nutrition that people are taking in, or the way they're training, like there's such a misalignment with what those that are putting it out on the internet are actually doing, and how it benefits you. So what it's actually doing for you. As an elite athlete, that you can skip that sort of meal as such. It doesn't have to be, every meal doesn't have to be kind of perfect, and it hasn't got to be that. It's got to just be the right thing for you at that right time. And again, you've got the function for what you're trying to do. So sometimes there maybe is a bit of an easier marry up there, but I think when people are only building it on aesthetics, that's a really dangerous place to live in. It's I think when people go to my gym, for example, and they see someone who is like a bodybuilder, and especially when they're on, say, like a shred, I know physiologically that person is quite weak at the moment because they're running on very low supplies of certain nutritional components. They're not actually there to perform. There's going to be functions that they can't perform because they don't have the nutrition to do it. Yet society will say, that looks amazing. That is aspirational.
Yeah, it's wild what kinds of bodies we celebrate and how far they are from a well-functioning body that has energy reserves to socialize and do hobbies. I remember when I was stuck in that cycle, and this would be 6 to 8 years ago now, I had enough energy to do my training well, and that was all. It was like an iPhone running on 5% battery. You could make that emergency phone call, do that key session, and then the phone would die. I would pass out on the couch and have no energy reserves for hobbies and fun and being social and being in a good mood and recovering, most importantly. So I think there's a lot of myths we could bust around nutrition and what's fed to us. No pun intended. No pun intended on social media. But I think at the end of the day, if you can, we need to be getting our education from a dietitian or a nutritionist and focusing on abundance and focusing on, most of the time, 80% of the time, of course, it's colorful and it's real foods, simple, healthy, nutritious, and there's plenty of room for your favorite treats because food is more than fuel. We hear a lot that food is fuel, but it's also sensory and it's social and it's nostalgic. It reminds you of your upbringing or the favorite ice cream shop you used to go to. And it's nice to be able to go out for dinner with friends and speak about the pizza that's in front of you and enjoy it. So there's space for all of that. As an Olympian, I can say, I have chocolate every day. Bread is my favorite food group. And there's absolutely room for all foods, especially when we exist in body positive sporting cultures.
Yeah, reach for the ice cream. It it is comes down to the fact that in doing those, I think you rid yourself of the psychological stress that will undoubtedly have an impact on your overall system as well. The fact that you could be stressing over having that pizza, that ice cream, will probably do you more damage in whether it's in the short term or even the long term. The fact that if you just go, today is just that day and I'm just going to allow myself to do it, and then you free yourself from that concern, but because you're a disciplined individual, because you're aware, or because you're conscious of what you're eating, you're probably not going to do it tomorrow, right? So at least there's not that element to it. You're not going to be, I need to have every meal, I need to be washing it down with a tub of ice cream. That's what I need to be doing. Well, no, okay, we were talking about a different conversation now, but do you know what I mean? It's having that awareness that it can be good for you if it's just, yeah, every now and then. But we're talking about things we probably already know.
Mm, absolutely. And I think if we don't attach labels to our favorite sweet foods and we don't categorize them as naughty or dirty or cheating or any of those unhelpful labels, then we're more likely to be able to enjoy them in moderation, um, without guilt, and not feel the need to have the entire tub because we don't go into that panic. Um, that's how we can create balance, I think.
Mm. Where do you stand with confidence? And when I mean this is, what is your idea of confidence as a woman and confidence as an athlete?
I think confidence is feeling as though you can be exactly who you are without a pressure to change that. And so then the inverse, a shyness or an anxiety or a lack of confidence that so many women and girls struggle with, is that feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with us, whether it's that our body looks wrong or our ambitions are too great or something within us is inadequate to achieve the goals that we've set out to achieve. That's why we can struggle so much with confidence. I think in order to build it, we need to broaden and diversify what it means to be a woman or a girl rather than having that definition be so narrow. And then more and more of us can feel as though we can come as we are. We don't need to change anything. And hopefully that can reinforce better confidence.
Mm. There was an interesting survey that I found. It was in 2023, and it said that 17% of girls aged from 7 to 21 said that they were very happy, compared to what was 40% in 2009. So very happy was at the very end of this scale, and only 17% are saying that. So that basically everyone else is saying they weren't feeling this level of happiness, and it was a drastic drop. And actually, even that, the part I found interesting was 8% of the girls that were 17 to 21 felt that they were happy comparative to that previous number. Where do you think we're failing young girls when it comes to confidence and happiness?
For me, I struggle with comparison to everyone else, and that's what really affects my confidence. And comparison is fed by social media for me. I think the human mind was probably designed to compare ourselves to the 50 or 100 people that we actually interact with in the real world, and we see how they actually look and how they actually perform and how they're fallible. And um, then when we shift to the online world, we're suddenly comparing ourselves to millions of other people who are only showing the best parts or an edited version. And that comparison is so out of whack, but still we're unable to look at it with a critical lens. Young girls are unable to look at those images or those curated feeds and understand that they are edited and picked out. And I think that really hampers our confidence. Interestingly, Australia just announced a world first social media ban for under 16s. And it'll be really interesting if there's some longitudinal studies done on confidence, because there's a book written called The Anxious Generation. And I heard the author interviewed recently, and they were explaining that if you were born before 1995, you're lucky. And you sort of went through adolescence and puberty without a smartphone, without social media. I missed the cut. I was born in 98. So if you were born on this side of 95, I would have had Facebook at the age of 13 or 14 and Instagram at around the same time. And you've got the smartest minds in Silicon Valley designing these platforms to be addictive and to be a trap. So what he explained is that a trap is something that is enticing to walk into, and then the door shuts and you can't get out. And that's exactly what it is. And it's designed to be a trap differently for girls and boys. They play on our psyche. So for girls, anxiety and low confidence has been the main outcome because it's bred comparison. We're constantly being fed notifications of, hey, do you want to see what so-and-so has commented on this? Do you want to see what they think of you? Do you want to see how much love and attention you're getting on this photo? And we can't help but be in that vortex of comparison, shame, and low self-esteem.
That's Jonathan Haidt's book. I think you're talking about Anxious Generation. Jonathan Haidt's done some amazing work, some amazing interviews with what he's found out there. I mean, how has the ban on social media for under 16s gone over there in Australia?
It's very mixed. I think we're lacking the education piece. It's one thing to ban under 16s from social media and then suddenly on their 16th birthday they're handed the app and free reign, off you go, without literacy, like what we were speaking about before. So I think maybe it's a good thing, but it needs to be complemented by literacy programs in schools to actually teach young people how to be social media literate. And when you reach 16, here's how you can approach it with critical thinking. Here's how you can read articles or look at different profiles and understand what's really going on. So I think that's the missing piece of the puzzle. But I think ultimately, if I could have my childhood over and not have social media until 16, it would have been a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I actually came out to Australia when I was 18, and I flew out literally as an 18-year-old, was housed with a family there, but it was 2008 and Facebook was invented in 2007. Now, if I think about me doing that now, I'm Instagramming me at the airport. I'm the trip. I'm probably on social media whilst I'm at the airport. You then land, and then you might WhatsApp your family all the way through it. Literally in 2008, it was like an email or a text message to kind of just tell my parents that I hadn't been eaten by a shark or bitten by a spider, and that was about it. And I think back to what I did during that period, and just that one summer initially as an 18-year-old. I went back and did many more. But that summer was so much fun because I was playing cricket. I was outside with my mates. I was when we were doing things, we would, and I mean doing things. This is standard 18-year-olds that you were doing things was being in a room, chatting the most rubbish you possibly could think of. But actually, if I think about it, we're chatting. Right, we're talking, we're creating stories, we're playing music, we're playing pool, we're engaging with each other. And I did beat that cut. I was a 1990 baby. So I feel so fortunate to have that. But I think with that comes a responsibility. I think it becomes a responsibility to be an adult in the room. And the reason I like what Australia have done is they have essentially, from a political point of view, just said, we're the adults in the room here. We know what this is doing. We don't need another research paper to tell us that this is going to be bad for us. We're probably going to look back at social media and think of it like the cigarettes or the sugar, that what it's doing to us. And I think having that responsibility as the older generation, rather than what some people of that generation have done, has been like, okay, we want to make sure people are safe, and we'll maybe coddle to everyone's needs and emotions. Go, no, we know this to be wrong. Stop it. We are the adults in the room.
I like it. And from a public health perspective, I've been studying a Master of Public Health this year. When we make change upstream, and rather than focusing on that personal responsibility to manage our addictions to screens, we actually think, how can we create an enabling environment for that action to take place? That's where better interventions occur. So what I like about this government-led ban is that the onus is no longer on parents to be harsher, because they've probably had a really challenging day at work, and navigating whether or not their child is using a digital pacifier or not might be the last thing on their to-do list. When we shift upstream and we put legislation in place that makes the healthy choice the easy choice, or creates an environment where it is easier to go back to how it was in your childhood and play and have real conversations with humans in the room with us. I think that's a healthy intervention, and hopefully it'll lead to higher physical activity rates for those under 16s.
Yeah, which is where sport, I think, just plays a huge role in this, because sport, uh, I think we've almost broken it in this. We've broken young people's social capacities because of the growth of social media. I was in a restaurant the other day, and a young group of boys came down and sat in this table of 8 next to us, and every single one of them was on their phone till the moment the food hit the table, and then they started talking to each other. And I found it really interesting, because the reason why I found it interesting was because they were doing something and then they were talking to each other. So it was kind of like they needed something to do in order to bring out the social element of how to interact with each other, to open that door of it's okay to interact, even if it was as simple as, can you pass the fries? And I found that really interesting. And I think that then relays to sport, is because then it becomes this thing that you are doing which opens the channels of communication, rather than if we sit in a room and we sit around a circular coffee table and we put our phones away. Who speaks first? Who says what? My anxiety is higher than yours. My social awkwardness is higher than yours. Oh no, am I going to say the right thing? I don't know what to say. And it becomes awkward, because that's what we've created. So I think if we use sport as that ability to open that door, but then encourage it past the sport, we could start to change kind of what we've lost. And because it is undeniable, when you do look at young people, the social capacity and the social skills in what they've got has diminished. It's just been diminished because it's not even their fault, right? It's not even their fault that it's been taken away from them. So we have to help them get it back. And I think sport can be a vehicle, but I also think the older generation, they can be responsible for doing that, rather than judging them and saying, because you can't communicate, you're bad. It's kind of like expecting someone to drive a car on the first day they get their license and be a Formula One driver, right? It's not real. Like, they just don't have the skill set yet.
Mm, definitely. I think in terms of motivating factors to be active and to play sport, particularly the research for women and girls, is that sport that is social and not necessarily competitive, not necessarily organized, but a greater focus on interacting and friends, and yes, being active, but that's not necessarily the reason for being there. That can be a really great source of motivation. I think that's what kept me going as a young girl. I wasn't necessarily excited to go to Little Athletics to do all of the events, but I knew I would see the few friends that I'd made, and I knew that we'd go off to the canteen after and perhaps have a sleep over the night before, and then be driven in one parent's car. So all of those lovely social rituals that are attached to sport are a really lovely byproduct, and it can be a great reason that people get involved.
Yeah, I think leaning on that, the women that drop out of sport later on in life, and I feel fortunate. I'm 34 years old. I still play sport to a high level, but I definitely play it for a social element now. Like, I don't have I can't go for my aspirations of what I had. I've left professional sport. So the social element is there. But that's kind of from a masculine point of view, that it's almost something we need to hold on to. We need that community. We need that group of people. But I think women have been left behind in that conversation a little bit. I think there really is an ability for women, and I don't know, it's not a specific number, I'm pulling one out of the bro science air here, of saying 24 to 38, that period of time. I think engaging in sport around that, when it would be really easy to sort of feel like, okay, maybe I go and do more feminine things, in inverted commas, and it's not a sport. And then there's this loss of social connection with a group, or maybe a sense of achieving something, setting a goal, being motivated, dedicating yourself to something. And I do think women have been left behind in that, because I know how important it is for men. I encourage men to stay in a sport, whether it's a team sport, whether it's an individual sport with a group, doing something, staying active, to do it just for the social connection, because men do it. But I think women also need to do that as well.
Definitely. And I'm right in the middle of that window, being 26, and I see so many of my female friends that they just normalize it in their language. They say, I really enjoyed netball, I really enjoyed running, I really enjoyed swimming, whatever it may be. And then it's almost like an obvious thing that they've walked away from it now that they're in that window of time where maybe our culture expects us to start being very much selfless, very much focused on what we can be doing for our partner or the other social circles that we find ourselves in. But I think coming back to that idea of ambition and allowing women and girls to think about themselves a little and have some personal goals that don't necessarily serve society or serve somebody else will maybe be part of that puzzle of making them feel like they can keep playing a sport. I think a lot of mums feel as though s- engaging in physical activity would be a very selfish endeavor. A lot of the time, nothing on their to-do list in the day is thinking about what is an activity that I can do that nourishes my mental and physical well-being and doesn't necessarily serve anybody else, as opposed to that huge mental load of other things that need to be done for other people. And I think you're right, it starts at about 24. So carrying the mental load more evenly with partners and with groups and freeing up some of young women's brain spaces to think maybe sport and physical activity would be really social and good for my health as well. Maybe I'll stay engaged.
You spoke about it. I hear that language as well, where they almost have self-retired themselves from this part of their life. Like, I was a netballer, I was a tennis player, I was a runner, and so no, you can still be those things. I will surely hang my boots up from playing cricket on a weekend basis, but if someone says, "Well, I'm still a cricketer," right? I'm still that thing. It's still there in my identity, but it's just one part of me. And I think if you, especially if it's just a general activity, something that's good for you, to say that you were something and sort of park it off and go, they're missing a trick there. That's yeah, it's kind of a death that's happened to a part of you, and therefore it cannot be resurrected and brought back, when reality is it can.
I think, yeah, young women need to know that we can be multiple things at once. I mean, I'm a medical student and an Olympian and a friend and a hobby chef and whatever else. We don't have to, yeah, pigeonhole ourselves into one area, and we don't have to give up the sport that we love or any hobby that we love just because we're a young woman and maybe thinking about next steps.
Well, how many mums were on the Australian squad? Jess Trengove has been on the podcast. I know has kids. She's an Olympian, and it's possible, right? It's obviously, this is the pointy end, right? But you'd argue it's the much more complicated end, because the amount of hours that you have to dedicate to that sport it's not just a game of netball with the girls down the park, right? It's not that. It's every day. So it's the very, very pointy end.
But they need the support in order to stay in the game. So all of the Australian marathon women in Paris were mums. We had Sinead Diver, Genevieve Gregson, and Jess Trengrove, and they have two, two and one babies each. But what I would say is there have been things that have been brought in that supported that. So Alison Felix, the world-renowned sprinter from the US, when she fell pregnant and was still in her prime, her shoe sponsor dropped her, and they wouldn't continue to pay her and support her throughout that pregnancy and to get back into running afterwards. And she has responded to that by really being the change she wanted to see in the world. So she created her own shoe brand that supports women. And critically, at the Paris Olympics, she created the first breastfeeding center, where normally we can't bring family and friends into the Olympic Village, but women who, so Jess Trengrove needed to make use of this because she had a really young baby, I think of only about 9 or 10 months, Ellie, and she was able to bring Ellie in before marathon day and breastfeed her, play with her, whatever needed to occur. And they're the kinds of changes that actually make a tangible difference to women and mums who are athletes being able to continue to juggle those two identities.
Love that. Absolutely love that. I want to come back to the confidence that we were talking about, and we kind of spoke about it just before we hit record. But where do you see young boys playing a role in helping young women build their confidence? Because I see young men have got a confidence crisis. I think they've got a purpose crisis. But my belief is that we can give men purpose when we build a message around them, something bigger than whatever it is they're about to achieve, or something bigger about themselves. It kind of goes back to your values, being value-based and driven. And I think having men step up to the plate and help women is something we need more of. But I'm curious to know, and I'd love to know what you think about, how do men help support women and be more confident?
I think men and boys can be a huge part of the solution, and unfortunately sometimes a part of the problem with this decline in participation rates for women and girls. I think if we start to be really mindful of our language and do away with things like you throw like a girl, you run like a girl, being a criticism, and mindful of our actions. So a young girl in an audience yesterday said to me the reason she dropped out of sport was that experience of a boy not passing the ball to her in physical education class during a basketball match. So that is one small action that you can do to build a girl's confidence. Just by passing her the ball in that game, it's that vote of trust, that vote of confidence that I know that you have the skill to get this ball into the basketball hoop or whatever it may be. So there's language, there's actions, and involving them, welcoming them in, making sporting environments rather than filled with fear and judgment and being an exclusive place, broadening them to welcome all different kinds of people. I remember as a school kid, the norm on the school oval was that the boys would be playing footy and soccer in the middle of the oval, and then the girls would be sitting in circles, gossiping or speaking around the perimeter of the oval. And I always thought I would love to get up and play with the boys, but there'd almost always be a barrier to that, whether that was a comment from someone, or if there was no barrier, there was no one was reaching out and saying, why don't you come in? We'd love it if you played with us. So that's just a small example. If boys are on the school oval and they can be more welcoming and encouraging of girls getting up and joining in. And, there's always going to be anatomical and physiological differences between boys and girls. A lot of the time, the girls are saying, well, I'm worried to participate because I'm physically smaller and not as strong, and how would I go in a tackle? And sometimes those things are unavoidable. I mean, I'm 5'1" and would not go well in a tackle if I was playing school footy today. So there are some things, that are different between boys and girls, but that ability to participate, all of those intrinsic benefits of physical activity and how deserving we are of a place on the sporting field doesn't differ.
I think and especially if we lean into the sort of 20s and 30s, I don't know if you've come across Scott Galloway's work and a lot of what he's been talking around about the masculinity movement and what it is, the idea of what it is to be a man now in society. And I'm fascinated by this because mainly I deal with a lot of young boys and I work with them, and whether it's in our work or just having conversations with them in schools or in teams or whatever it is, that they are lost. They really are lost at the moment. While women, we've spoken about women having a confidence crisis, there is a confidence crisis in young men as well. And I think it's really important that we do have confident men, because I think good, strong, confident men build up everyone around them. I think about what I want to do in my life, and my version of success is leaving people in a better place than how I found them. So my goal is to literally leave people in that. And I don't think that many men fall far away from that. I think they want to help people. They want to, but we've somewhere left them behind. So kind of on the reverse of this, how do you think women can best support men in building their confidence and build a sense of them being a strong man?
Hmm. I think we've come in leaps and bounds in the last decade or decades in terms of reimagining what it means and what it looks like to be a woman or a girl. But I was saying that I feel like feminism has failed the boys and men to a certain extent, whilst those options of what it means to be a girl are broadening. Sometimes I feel like options for what it means to be a boy or a man have stayed quite narrow. And so perhaps, with no experience of it myself, perhaps young boys feel very stuck with those stereotypes of being big and strong, loud, the protector, needing to provide financially. I'm not sure. All of those layers of expectation. And that must feel suffocating just as much as young girls have been the opposite. They've been expected to be as small as possible and as shy and as quiet as possible and lacking ambition. So we need to now start broadening those ideas of what it means to be a confident, great man or boy. And I think women who are creative and imaginative and who are currently experiencing this shift and this empowerment can hopefully help men and boys do the same. I mean, the best men and boys that I know are confident and soft at the same time. It's that careful balance of not necessarily needing to be loud and aggressive and dominating a room in order to be confident. People like my dad and my partner and close family friends who are men who inspire me, they know who they are driven, they are inspiring, they are confident, whilst at the same time holding space for others in a room and bringing others up and leaving them better off, just as you were saying your goal is.
Yeah, I see this. I use the word strong man, and I use it. I do use it because I don't see that as just a physical strength or a domineering strength. Being strong is about having this awareness of, when do I use my capacities in the right moment? When do I use my strength and my courage and what I can really feel proud about? But when do I draw on the vulnerability? And the vulnerability conversation has had a lot of attention in the male space definitely for the last 5 to 10 years, more than I've ever seen. And I think while it's been really, really important to access that, I think it's been shone on for too long with disregard to the other aspects that men can draw upon to make them feel better about themselves. And then that's left confusion. So it's left them between, do I just act this way? Is that what people want? And then they may miss out on this other part that really tunes into almost a biological need within them that they then have disregarded, and then they feel they've lost that, and then they maybe overcompensate, and then they're drawn towards an Andrew Tate who's spilling out a message that on the face of it is not the right message to be sending. But if you arguably go below it and you just draw upon what its tenets are, or what it's wrongly being spouted about, there are some core principles that do work towards men to strive towards something bigger, to be a man of courage and pride. Those are not bad messages. The way they've been spread are bad and negative. But I think the vulnerability conversation has probably had too much time on it, and it's no coincidence that every time I do something with a young guy and I get them to, whether it's achieve something, but also lean on who they are as an individual, who they are as a young man, and what that means about, and the acceptance of how that is a good characteristic to have, whether it is courage or bravery, or whether it's kindness and compassion, or whether it's patience, or whether it's perseverance, that when they lean onto those characteristics, they're like, I get it now. I'm not just built out of what I do, what I achieve, how big or strong I am. There is so much more to me.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? Like, men can be patient and softly spoken and kind and all of those perhaps more feminine traits traditionally. And they can be strong and ambitious and courageous. And that duality is possible and is in fact desirable, I think.
It's knowing what skill to use at the right time. It's the same as an athlete. You have all these tools at your disposal that you are spending hours on developing, and then your real skill set is implementing them on race day, on game day, and knowing which one to use at the right time. Or in not a sporting context, it's knowing that you don't bring a rifle to a cookout and you don't bring a whisk to a war, right? You bring the right tool for the right job at the right time. And we have to remember that it is within us to do that. We don't just have to be one thing. And yeah, I think it leans off what we spoke about earlier about role models. I think while role models are really important, have been for you and being one, and my goal has always been a role model. I think for young men, it's really important. For young women, it's really important. And we maybe are pointing our young people in the direction of the wrong role models right now. I think that's where we might be going wrong. We're not creating the right role models to point young people in the direction of.
Yeah, and I think in terms of male role models in my country, the Australian rules football players have been the gods. It's our national religion, and I imagine growing up, if you were a young boy, you'd want to be an AFL player, or if you didn't want to physically play the sport, you would want to look like them or act like them. But unfortunately, oftentimes they haven't been the best role models. There's often stories around substance abuse or drinking or violence or not being a very good sportsman on the field. And then there's the body image piece of feeling the need to look like a footballer. So I think having diverse role models, like some AFL footballers are awesome and let's look up to those. But then we also have seen in recent years Harry Garside, an Australian boxer who has confidently walked red carpets in a skirt sometimes, nail polish, whatever it is that makes him feel like his true self and creative. And that is really questioning those stereotypes and broadening what it means for men's fashion and what it means to express yourself fully. So that's just one example, but even within sport, having a variety of role models for the boys coming through is really healthy, I think.
Harry Garside's a great example for someone. He literally punches someone in the face for a job. So it's like the most masculine thing you could ask him to do. And yeah, he does all of those things. And especially in Australia, like that's not an easy culture to do that, because I was in Australia earlier on this summer, and you go to parts of Australia, especially the metropolitan areas, whether in the centre of Melbourne or if you're in the centre of Sydney, any city centre, it's fairly forward-thinking, progressive. But as you start to reach into the more rural areas, you you probably start to skip a few years and you start to go back a little bit further. So I know that's not easy for someone like Harry Garside to do that, because there will still be an undercurrent of old cultures within the new one.
Absolutely. I mean, he's lent into ballet classes and challenged all sorts of stereotypes and said just how great the ballet has been for his poise and his flexibility and his boxing. So it reinforces that idea of the duality, and holding space for different kinds of strength, as you say.
Jemima, look, this has been amazing. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, having time with you here. Just before we finish off, what would be the advice? And I know you're 26, and you have you're such an old soul. I sent my friend, one of my best friends, I sent her your video, and I said, I'm going to be interviewing Jemima. Is there anything that you want me to ask her, or is there anything that you'd love? And I spoke about the topics that I was going to talk about. And as soon as she heard your interview, she said, "I have nothing to say. This woman is going to take care of the conversation. She is a soul. She's very tuned in, my friend." And she said, "This woman has an incredible soul." And I said, I agree. I have no doubt that this episode is going to be great. And I just want to ask, what advice would you give your younger self now, even though at the age of 26? What with everything you've gone through the elite levels of sport, but definitely the journey that you've been on, because the work that you've done is undeniable. You don't often meet too many people that have done the work, especially at your age. I did the work sort of from into my 30s, start of my 30s, and probably the most work I've really done is in the last year or two. But to do it now, I think is really admirable. So what advice would you give your younger self with everything you've gone through right now?
I would say stay in your lane, which can mean a few things, but self-awareness and coming to understand how my mind works, what my skills are, where my weaknesses are, who's there for me. All of those things have been really critical to my development in recent years. And I would say stay in your lane in terms of the confidence piece that we've discussed today as well. So much of my self-doubt and lack of confidence as an adolescent girl was about looking at everyone else and thinking, and that comparison, and thinking I wasn't good enough, I was missing something, I would never make it. But one of the nicest interpretations of my post-race interview by Ben Crow in Australia, who worked closely with Ash Barty as her mental skills coach, he said was my ability to stay in my lane, know who I am, know what I have to offer, and focus on those strengths. So that would be my advice. I think that was something that was so challenging as a young person, to just stick to our path and not be too overwhelmed by the broader pressures or people picking you apart. But it would have been good advice.
Yeah. People draw upon everyone else's lanes. I think they focus on, is someone else's lane better than mine? Do I need to be in their lane? Do I need to shift over there? And actually, all the way back to the start of this concept of wanting it and not needing it, I really loved the part where you said just going out there and having a crack and just giving it a go, and that for me refers back to this, my path. I'm just going to give this a go. And I have struggled recently with the sort of decision paralysis in my life sometimes, where I'm like, what happens if I go over there and that path? What if someone's idea of my path over here was better, or this path over here? And that's been sort of my challenge to go through. And what I'm trying to do, and I think of Ellen Geller's, is it Ellen Langer's words, where she says, instead of worrying about making the right decision, make the decision right. And it's just really go for it, like full on, just go for it, believe in it, and then deal with whatever's at the next crossroad after that. And I think when you're chasing your path, it can be really easy to not think you're doing the right thing, focus on everyone else, but to just give it a crack, go for your path and fly into it.
Absolutely. I would, if I could add anything to stay in your lane, it would be give it a go. I think a lot of us shy away and be passive, like we've discussed today. And, as cheesy as it is, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So sometimes you've got to throw your hat in the ring, and all of that self-doubt might be unfounded, and it might be holding you back from something that you really could do.
Where can people stay up to date with what you're doing? Where can they follow along with the Play On initiative and the amazing work that you're doing?
So I'm on Instagram at Jemima Montag, and you can also follow at Girls Play On. The website is girlsplayon.org, and the email, if you're interested, maybe not in the UK, but if you're in Australia, the email is playonpresentations@gmail.com, and we can send a woman Olympian or Paralympian to your school or sport club to help those girls overcome the barriers to participation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jemima Montag, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode with Jemima, then you might enjoy even more episodes of the show. And to get started, we've put together some of the best episodes for you to watch right now. All you got to do is click right here. Go on, go.